It's Saturday, July 15th, 1881, and if you want to be where all the cool people are, you had better make your way over to the funeral of Billy the Kid. Now, according to some people who are lying, Billy the Kid's funeral is where dozens and dozens of reputable citizens came together to view the body of Billy the Kid, and they all agreed that Billy the Kid was as dead as a doornail. Pat Garrett and his deputies stuck around for the whole thing, as Garrett says he would not allow any violation of the body. You're not going to go steal a souvenir finger off the kid's body on Pat Garrett's watch. No, sir. So he and two of his deputies, 3 of them total, stayed there for the whole thing, surrounded by 300 Mexicans who had been friends of Billy the Kid and hostile to the deputies the day before, but now that the kid was dead, they were totally fine with it. And that's lucky for Pat Garrett, because you see, Pat Garrett had some official government paperwork he had to do. You know, duty demanded that he follow procedure to the letter. So he called a completely unbiased and independent justice of the peace who put together an independent inquest comprised of completely unbiased and independent jurors, and they all unanimously agreed that in fact it was Billy the Kid that was killed, and they ruled not only that, but it was a justifiable homicide. Now, although they didn't tell us exactly why it was justified, the only thing I can personally think of is the kid had a gun in his hand. I mean, Garrett and his people said so. So that means that the kid was armed and dangerous. I mean, he'd have to be, right? I mean, you can't just go shoot an unarmed guy. There had to be a gun. In fact, the coroner's jury specifically includes a statement from Pete Maxwell saying that he saw in Billy the Kid's hand a gun in that dark room where it was completely black and you couldn't see anything. He saw it. Case closed. Oh, and this completely independent jury also decided that they should include, and I think this was a nice touch personally, in the official verdict that it'd be nice if Pat Garrett got a little reward money. You know, a little something for his trouble. And again, I think that was a nice touch. Now, we know because the newspapers of the time told us that Billy the Kid was a leader of a gang of outlaws. And it is true, he had a group of people that he rode with. Pat Garrett knew firsthand about this because he had already shot 2 of them from ambush without warning, and he knew very well that this was a life and death situation. John Poe, one of the deputies, says that they stayed on guard all night after killing the kid because they thought the kid's friends were going to come and attack them. So let's play pretend. You're the sheriff of Lincoln County and the kid comes walking across the yard into the bedroom and you shoot him dead. What would your next question be? Is it possible you'd wonder where he came from and who was with him? Would you ask any questions at all about that? Would you talk about it at all? Would you maybe do a report? Or would you just call it a day? You wouldn't maybe wonder like, where's his boots at? Where's his horse at? Where are the rifle and pistols he stole from the Lincoln County courthouse? Nothing? You wouldn't ask any questions about this guy who just appeared out of nowhere? You wouldn't want to know who he was staying with? Well, actually, we know that Garrett did know who Billy the Kid was staying with. He says in The Authentic Life of Billy the Kid that Billy the Kid was staying with, quote, a Mexican friend, end quote. So there you go. Nobody. Just some, some Mexican, some random unnamed friend. I don't know who it was. Really? Well, now we know exactly who it was that Billy the Kid was staying with when he was hiding in Fort Sumner. And the answer to the question is he was staying with Pat Garrett's relatives. Yep, you got that right. Billy the Kid was staying with Celsa and Sabal Gutierrez. And they were aiding and abetting this wanted murderer who had killed a sheriff and at least 3 different deputies. Now, I wonder what Pat Garrett thought about that his own relatives were harboring this notorious outlaw. Apparently, he didn't care very much. He didn't recommend charges. He doesn't name them by name. And what's kind of irregular is that Sabal Gutierrez, the person, again, who was aiding and abetting the most wanted outlaw in New Mexico, was asked to be a member of the coroner's jury. And his signature appears on the fake document that Maurice Fulton provided to William Morrison and who critics today point to as the original document. But regardless, even in the earliest transcripts that are mentioned, Sabal Gutierrez is mentioned as one of the jurors. Is that not irregular? Was it so independent that Pat Garrett wouldn't object to his brother-in-law being on the jury? Oh wait, I thought there were dozens and dozens of people. This was the event of the century. The entire town of Fort Sumner came out. There's all these people around. I mean, there's so many people around, it's like the Forrest Gump shrimp scene. Shrimp kebab, shrimp creole, shrimp gumbo, pan-fried, deep-fried, stir-fried. I mean, there's people that will list all the people that saw the body. Garrett saw the body, McKinney saw the body, Poe saw the body. They'll go on and on and on, every now and then throwing in a newspaper article that says that someone said that they saw the body. So why would you need Sabal Gutierrez as a member of the coroner's jury? You can't find anybody else? There's only 7 people, 6 really, on it, plus supposedly a president. Of course, Paco Anaya said that that's not true, and that Milder Rudolph wasn't the presidente, and that he never saw the body, and that they had added other members that didn't see the body either. But why would you have Sabal Gutierrez, the brother-in-law of the shooter, be a part of the independent coroner's inquest? Don't worry. Not irregular at all. Don't screw up the story. The kid is dead, and dozens of people hang out and party at this huge funeral. Everybody sees the body. They take pictures with it. They put it on their Instagram. It's awesome. Okay, I made up the last part about the Instagram, but somebody else made up the part about the dozens of people all seeing the body and having primary knowledge that the kid is dead. But let's keep going. These people can say with a straight face, there were no irregularities and all the proper paperwork was filed. It's inconceivable that there was anything different that happened. Now, I don't mean to be nasty, but these people are liars. They are willing to misrepresent the facts of history. It doesn't have to be that way. Something can be totally irregular, and let's just say effed up. But that could still be the way it happened. Garrett could have killed Billy the Kid that night. But to say that it's inconceivable that it went down any other way because the evidence just isn't there, and to respond to people's legitimate questions with, "How dare you, sir?" tells you that these people are not serious about finding the truth. And they don't respect your ability to make up your own mind. And I don't think we should just sit back and let these types of people bully others into silence. So the kid's killed. Hooray. Where are his things? He had stolen a Winchester and some 6-shooters from the Lincoln County courthouse. So those weren't even his things. Where is it? Where's his horse? Someone pointed out in a comment to our last video, why didn't Garrett bring back his pinky ring as evidence? It's a great point. But not just that. Is it normal to not bring back any personal belongings? Even stolen property that he had taken from Lincoln County? Doesn't sound right. The whole situation is ludicrous. There's no report filed, no personal belongings retrieved, no referral for prosecution for the people hiding the kid, nothing. As far as I know, the one personal belonging that, quite frankly, is critical to the whole story is missing. And that's the .41 caliber Colt Thunderer self-cocking revolver that the kid supposedly had in his hand. Where exactly did that pistol get off to? Like, wouldn't Garrett submit that into evidence? It's kind of important because if Garrett did kill the kid, the only thing that would have made it a justifiable killing is the pistol. Without the pistol, Garrett shot an unarmed man in his socks. And yes, I know the kid had a knife, but that knife went up for auction a few years ago, and you can go look at the photo. It looks like a butter knife. It's got a rounded tip. You can't stab anybody with it. And even if you want to argue that that thing is razor sharp, which it doesn't really look, it's a pretty crude knife. It could be razor sharp. Got it. So maybe the kid could have slashed at the 3 law enforcement officers armed with guns. Hey, knives are dangerous. Totally get it. But they go on and on about the fact that he had a gun and he pulled the gun on them. He was pointing the gun at them, etc. And yet we don't have the gun. You're telling me they didn't think it was important enough to hold on to? Come on. So let's make sure we have this straight again. And sorry for being redundant. We're told on July 14th, 1881, around midnight, Pat Garrett killed Billy the Kid. Dozens of reputable people saw the body. There were many official legal documents that back up Garrett's claim. He was paid the reward. No one doubted him ever. How could anybody argue with that? Well, mostly because it's not true. Now, in the last episode, I said that people had been lying about this coroner's jury for over 70 years. And I have to say I was mistaken. People have been lying about things like that and about this night in question for over 140 years. And I want to share one example from 97 years ago in 1926. In 1926, the Honolulu Advertiser-Sun newspaper printed some new evidence from the New Mexico Historical Society, legitimate group. And the New Mexico Historical Society said that they had met with an old-timer in El Paso that had told them that the kid was still alive. Not just that, there was another man that long ago had assisted the kid in his escape and brought him from Texas to New Mexico. This man had met the kid himself in 1916 after he was said to have been killed, and his story was corroborated by Manuel Taylor, an old prospector that used to run races with the kid in Silver City and once pried the bars off of the chimney top of the old adobe jail so Billy could climb out. Wow. So here's the first time the kid's in jail, and this guy, Manuel Taylor, pried the bars off the chimney so the kid could escape. So although the first two men are not mentioned, they do mention Manuel Taylor. And I have to believe that if they were interested in the story, they could have identified the other people. But they didn't want to, and we'll see that in a second. Taylor said he met the kid in Guadalajara, Mexico in 1914, and that they had a few drinks together. He said the kid had married there and had a family. So, it's 1926, and these people are questioned by the New Mexico Historical Society and are available to be questioned again, but the defenders of Pat Garrett can't have that and come to the rescue. First up to bat, Walter Noble Burns, who had just put out a biography of Billy the Kid, and Burns said that that wasn't true and that there were still 3 people alive that saw the body. Those 3 people were Paulito Yamarillo, who you may know better as Paulita Maxwell, Manuel Abreu, and Deluvina Maxwell. So, 2 of Maxwell's family members and Manuel Abreu, who Paco Anaya said didn't see the kid's body at all, and who Pat Garrett handpicked to write a coroner's jury report that he agreed with. Anyway, Burns goes on to say that in addition to these people, when Garrett killed the kid, John W. Poe was there, Tip McKinney, whose nickname was actually Kip, not Tip, was there, and then, of course, Garrett himself was there. He says all of those people were there, and there was certainly never any doubt about the kid's death in the minds of any of those, because Walter Noble Burns said so. I don't know if this is sounding familiar to you, but it's the same stuff, man. 100 years ago, they did the same thing. Nobody ever questioned Garrett. Nobody ever did. Never. Now, needless to say, Burns is not credible at all. He put out a nonfiction book, The Saga of Billy the Kid, that is now recognized as being full of fiction. And he was also the brother-in-law of the New Mexico governor, Thomas Mabry, who in 1950 would turn Brushy Bill Roberts' legal petition for pardon into a media circus and then hide the petition for pardon documents from the public while using the press to brand Roberts a fraud. These are people that are desperate to control the narrative. Actually, in 1926, 1881, 2023, it's the same. In fact, Burns not only wrote a book on Billy the Kid in 1926 at age 60, after living in Kentucky and Chicago his whole life, but also miraculously the same year discovered the kid's grave. It's a Christmas miracle. You see, Billy the Kid's grave had been lost for over 40 years, which also tells me Garrett didn't kill the kid. Because you're going to remember where you buried Billy the Kid. You're not going to forget that, in my humble opinion. But it had been lost for 40 years, and miraculously, when Burns puts his book out, he goes, hey, there it is. This is the spot. Like I said, it's a Christmas miracle. But Burns wasn't alone. When rumors that the kid was alive came out from the New Mexico Historical Society in 1926, the El Paso Times sprang into action, printing an article that reads, quote, Billy the Kid Myths, end quote, that reads as follows. All of these stories about Billy the Kid being alive and living quietly in the Southwest for 45 years after his reported demise are interesting and make good hot weather reading, but like other summer fiction, they must be read with an eye attuned to fiction. We, like the rest of the United States, are apt to regard Billy the Kid and his nemesis, Pat Garrett, as almost legendary characters, and perhaps we may give an open ear to legendary tales about them. But we must remember that Billy the Kid was a very real character, known to many men still living in this part of the country, while Pat Garrett, the redoubtable peace officer who risked his life in the day's work to end the outlaw's lurid career, lived here honored and respected, a friend of most El Paso pioneers for a quarter century after the Kid's end. Sheriff Garrett's reputation for honesty, bravery, and fair dealing is too well established to suffer from the mythical tales about the outlaw. To the men who knew the details of the Kid's crime and his death and burial, there has never been an instant of doubt. In the first place, all of the official records of the Kid's death and burial are in order. All the official records? There's one coroner's inquest signed by Garrett's brother-in-law, as well as other people he handpicked that he had a dude write for himself, that the original coroner jury member and state legislator said that he collected a bunch of new people that didn't see the body, and that it's not true. Those are all the official records of the Kid's death and burial in order? They've got to be kidding me. Sorry, I digress. There are plenty of men in those days, some of them dead now, who knew the demise of the Kid in all of its details. In the second place, Pat Garrett's personal record is such that any suggestion of a plot to permit Billy the Kid to escape in which he could have been engaged is unthinkable. Garrett's fidelity to duty never was questioned. This is like a common thing. Oh, nobody's ever questioned that. The story of the Kid's escape is like the stories of a good many other celebrated criminals who now and then are resurrected after most of the eyewitnesses are dead. Fortunately, there are enough men left who knew Garrett intimately to set at rest any such rumors. As fiction, it is interesting, but only as fiction. The El Paso Times. They signed it. Put their name on it. So there you go. Inconceivable. All the official records of the Kid's death and burial are in order, and Garrett's integrity is too well established to be questioned. Garrett is known for fair dealing and a model citizen. That's not true, obviously. Garrett did not have a good reputation at all and was murdered on the side of the road while, forgive the expression, taking a piss. And the guy that did it was acquitted. Also, the records weren't in order at all, but they continued to repeat it because they said so. The truth doesn't matter to these people. Now, regarding Garrett's character, when William Vincent Morrison came forward with Brushy Bill Roberts claiming to be Billy the Kid, they tried to shut him down immediately. Pat Garrett's son, Oscar Garrett, threatened to sue Brushy Bill for impugning his father's reputation. And so, it became necessary for Mr. Morrison to do the research to establish that Pat Garrett had always been known as a dirtbag. Now, let me pause here and say I don't mean any disrespect to the family of Mr. Garrett or Mr. Garrett himself. These were different times. I wasn't there. I'm only sharing what I discovered in my research. And in my research, I happen to have a never-before-published letter from Mr. Morrison, written on February the 2nd, 1962, that I would like to share with you. And it reads as follows. It's written to a Mr. James T. Bussey in Dallas, Texas, regarding Pat F. Garrett, February 2nd, 1962. Mr. Morrison says, Dear Mr. Bussey, I have your letter of December 4th, 1960. So he took him a couple years to respond, a year plus, with reference to the family history of Mr. Garrett, with which I am not familiar. So dude's doing genealogy, maybe he thinks he's relative, or I don't know, and says, hey, I need your help with Pat Garrett's genealogy. Morrison says, I don't have any idea, and I don't care. Mr. Morrison says, at the time we filed a petition for a pardon in behalf of a man claiming to be Billy the Kid, the late Oscar Garrett, son of Pat, threatened to file suit against this client. It was my duty to obtain necessary facts, legal evidence, and competent testimony to establish in the probable court proceeding that the father, Pat Garrett, failed to leave a good name and reputation in this country and that he had never killed the kid. So basically, as I just said, Oscar Garrett's like, hey, shame on you. How dare you, sir, to impugn the good name of his father. And so if you're going to sue me for that or sue my client for that, I guess I have to go get all the evidence that your dad actually was a scumbag. So you can't, if it's true, you can't sue him for libel. Morrison continues. Of course, since they failed to leave any legal evidence, again, Morrison was tied to a law firm. They looked for this evidence. They wrote the county. They looked for it. Nobody could provide a official copy of the death certificate. It didn't exist. It still doesn't exist. When he got an argument with Maurice Fulton went and supposedly made a copy, but that copy, there's a lot of mistakes in the copy. And then also, too, he had the obvious Freudian slip where he says, and you can tell it's not fake because all the handwriting's different on the signatures. Anyway, we talked about that last time. But Morrison says, of course, since they failed to leave any legal evidence and there were no living witnesses to testify that the kid had been killed as claimed by Garrett at the time, the governor refused to pay him the reward money. It would not have been too difficult to defend the issue, is what he says. He doesn't care if he gets sued or not. And it was my belief that the son could not have proved his contentions. In a court proceeding, scientific investigation would have been available to our client, which in my opinion would have established our claim. He was solid that Brushy Bill was Billy the Kid. There's no fraud here. He's welcoming a scientific investigation to prove that Brushy was Billy the Kid. Anyway, this is what's interesting. It came to my attention that Pat left a wife. Nobody knows this. I don't think anyone has ever published this or talked about this. I could be wrong. Tell me in the comments if I am. It's come to my attention that Pat left a wife when he skipped town from the Sweetwater area to the Panhandle, thence to New Mexico, where he again married and left a family. It was not necessary for me to pursue this matter, and I do not recall if he left children in that area. Also, I had interviewed the widow of a former associate of Pat in New Mexico who was anxious to relate what she knew about Garrett, who had threatened the life of her husband. Okay, so when Garrett was killed on the side of the road, it's because he was threatening Wayne Brazel. And that's why Wayne Brazel supposedly was acquitted. But this is a guy, he's a bully. He goes around telling people he's going to kill them, and not a good dude, okay? And interesting that he was married, to Apollonia Garrett, but that was at least his second wife. He had already left a wife and kids before in the Sweetwater area, I believe of Louisiana. So that's the truth about Pat Garrett. And yet, the El Paso newspaper says, how dare you, sir? Pat Garrett was never questioned. He's a man of utmost respect. He's a friend to the people. Just total nonsense. Now, do I personally know any of the particulars? No. But I know there's a lot of information that has come out that says Garrett was not as blameless as the paper said in 1881 or in 1926. And let's just have a little reality check. Remember, the people that got Garrett elected as sheriff are the same people that said with a straight face that John Tunstall, the Englishman that was boss of Billy the Kid and the Regulators, pulled a gun on the posse of outlaws and lawmen that ambushed him in Lincoln. So you have a posse full of Jesse Evans, Bob Ollinger, all these bad people come riding up on a single lone John Tunstall. They kill him in cold blood, pose him like he's having sex with his horse, his dead body, leave him there, and go back to Lincoln. And they say, no, he pulled a gun on us. Of course, that's why you leave him there, right? That's why you leave a dead body where you shot him down. And that's why you pose him like he's having sex with his horse. He pulled a gun on me, bro. Of course I had to shoot him and pose him like he's having sex with his horse. Come on. That's the official government position on the death of John Tunstall. So please don't tell me, the official government position is that Pat Garrett killed Billy the Kid. Really? Really? John Tunstall was shot dead. John Tunstall pulled a gun on a frickin' posse that posed him having sex with his horse? Come on. Give me a break. These people are shameless. As Brushy Bill said, the law wasn't any good. So, in that instance, Dick Brewer, Tunstall's foreman, along with some of his other cowboys, including Billy the Kid, went to the Justice of the Peace, John B. Wilson, and got sworn in as constables to bring their boss's killers to justice. Well, it just so happened that Mr. Morrison wrote a letter to Brushy Bill Roberts on August 9th, 1950. This is before he came out to the governor, and this is before his wife knew he was Billy the Kid. And I'm going to share this with you. I think it's important enough that I share this kind of original document. It's actually a copy of Mr. Morrison's copy, but you'll see it's original. It's got the same handwriting. It's got different handwriting on all the signatures. You know it ain't fake. No, I'm not going to do that to you. If you really look at it, you can see my toes and you can see my hands, and I'm holding it in Barbara Morrison's living room. But I've already proven that I had a relationship with Mrs. Morrison, etc. So let them question if they like. So anyway, Mr. Morrison wrote a letter to Brushy Bill on August 9, 1950, and I'm going to share it with you. And Mr. Morrison says the following, quote, to Brushy Bill. There was a large crowd in Lincoln on Sunday. I talked to Mr. George Wilson, son of Justice of the Peace John B. Wilson, who told me that Garrett did not kill the kid. His father, John B. Wilson, is the man who gave Brewer and the kid the warrants for the arrest of the murderers of Tunstall. Also, it was at his house where the kid met Governor Wallace that night in 1879. George Wilson worked for John Poe. Isn't that interesting? So the son of Justice of the Peace Wilson that swore in the regulators ended up working for John Poe, who was with Garrett the night that they said they killed the kid. Mr. Wilson asked Poe if Garrett had killed the kid that night at Maxwell's. Poe said that he was sitting out on the steps of the porch when 2 shots were fired inside the house. Garrett ran out of the house, and Poe told him that he had shot the wrong man and that the kid was still out in the yard. Now that's damn interesting to me. And what exactly does it mean? Well, it's Morrison telling his client about his conversation with George Wilson. Now, does Morrison saying so mean that it's hard evidence? No, but it's a historic data point from 1950, and context matters. And in this context, he's writing a private letter to his client. He didn't say it to him so that I could make a YouTube video or a podcast 70 years later in 2023. He said it because he wanted Brushy to know that what Brushy had told him had been corroborated by Justice of the Peace Wilson's son. If that's true, then that tells me that Poe was definitely in on the cover-up of the killing of Billy the Kid. And that personally disappoints me, because I always had a feeling that Poe was kind of the good guy in the bunch. But I don't know if people know this, but prior to July of 1881, Garrett and Poe didn't even know each other. In The Authentic Life of Billy the Kid by Pat Garrett, Garrett says the following, quote, a gentleman named John W. Poe, who had superseded Frank Stewart in the employ of the stockman of the Canadian River, I guess, was at Lincoln on business, as was one of my deputies, Thomas McKinney. I first went to McKinney and I told him I wanted him to accompany me on a business trip to Arizona, that we would go down home and start from there. He consented. I then went to Poe and to him disclosed my business and all of its particulars, showing him my correspondence. He also complied with my request that he should accompany me. So, Poe tags along with Garrett and McKinney, who was already a deputy with Garrett and who had been for a long time. And they end up going to Fort Sumner. Now, what's interesting is that supposedly after killing Billy the Kid in the summer of 1881 and becoming famous and maybe rich for his trouble, Garrett chooses not to run again for the sheriff of Lincoln County in 1882, just a year later. So he gets his dream job as sheriff, kills the kid, and then doesn't run again. He actually ran for a different office. But guess who decides to run? John W. Poe. And John W. Poe wins and becomes the sheriff of Lincoln County. Also in 1882, Garrett has a son, born on June 9th, 1882. And you know what his name is? Dudley Poe Garrett, after John W. Poe. And Dudley Garrett actually goes by his middle name and is known as Poe Garrett. Now, Garrett meets Poe for the first time in 1881, when he's 32 years old. And within 12 months, Poe has his job, and Garrett names his kid after him. Really? That's interesting. Now, I'm not trying to find smoke where there's no fire, but some people may want to argue that just maybe there was a deal made between Garrett and Poe, and maybe Poe got a little something in exchange for going along with Garrett's version of events. Easy to do, because he had never even seen the kid before anyway. But are you going to tell me that's not just a little bit irregular? It's not suspicious at all? It's just me? Dude meets somebody, 32 years old. Yeah, how many new friends you meeting at 32? This guy becomes your bosom buddy, takes your job, and you name your kid after him? Really? Okay. There's another deputy that didn't get his job and that didn't have a kid named after him. Kip McKinney. And what did Kip McKinney say happened the night of July 14th, 1881, when they killed the most notorious outlaw of New Mexico? Nothing. Not a dang thing. We have no idea what McKinney said because he never publicly shared his version of what happened that night. Yep. You have a lawman that's involved in the biggest capture of his career and arguably of the time and never says a word about it. Oh, we know what he said when Tom O'Folliard was killed. He said, "Take your medicine, son." Remember that? Yeah, Tom O'Folliard was having a hard time because he was shot in the stomach or whatever. He's dying. Kip McKinney says, "Take your medicine, son." We know that. We know what he said about that, but we have no idea what he said about the death of Billy the Kid. That's not odd. Now, something I've heard over the years, and I just saw again over on the Wikitree genealogy page. So maybe not the best source, but what the heck? I'm just going to share it anyway, because I have heard this before, and I guess we have to run down the source. But it doesn't matter, because this is hearsay. This is a data point, not evidence. McKinney allegedly told 3 different versions of the story to a friend and to family members. The first was that he, Garrett, and Poe tied up Billy's girlfriend to bait Billy, and then Garrett shot him from ambush. The second version was that Kip McKinney himself had shot someone, only he shot the wrong guy. And then finally, the final story was that Garrett killed the wrong man on the porch of Pete Maxwell's house and that the real kid escaped. Now, the thing about data points is you look for corroboration. Like, are there independent corroboration of the same data point? Like we talked about the Mexican with the beard. For Brushy Bill to come up with that independently 70 years later when he would have no knowledge of those articles is compelling to me. But for these stories, there's some corroboration, but it's hard to know if any of them are true. For example, the idea that Billy was baited is kind of interesting and matches a March 27th, 1887 article from the Chicago Tribune that quotes a person who's only identified as, quote, "a man from Dodge," end quote. For all we know, that could be McKinney. It could be some random dude. I have no idea. But in the article, he says that Garrett was in Maxwell's house in kind of a spare room or bedroom. And the old man, meaning Maxwell, told Billy there was one of his old gang there wanting to see him and lured him in there, at which time Garrett shot him. Personally, I don't think that's likely. It's interesting, the story, one says, a member of his old gang was there. The other one says his girlfriend was there. Both of those just seem like they don't really fit. Like, hey, I'm going to take you to go see this girl. Like, that's weird. And then say, oh, I got this guy you want to meet. That's weird. The kid was very suspicious. I don't see that happening. But hey, don't know. It's just a data point. Secondly, the idea that McKinney shot the wrong guy instead of Garrett is interesting. And that's kind of new to me. But it's the only time I've heard it. And again, single hearsay data points don't hold much water. And also, I don't think there's any way in hell that Garrett would take responsibility for somebody else's shooting if he shot the wrong guy. Based on what I know about Garrett, that doesn't seem like something he'd be willing to do. The last one, however, is that the body was on the porch, that Garrett shot the wrong man, and that the kid escaped. That actually matches quite a few data points. And that one actually has a source. It's what Brushy Bill said. It's also what the son of Colonel Albert Fountain, Jack Fountain, said that Pat Garrett himself personally told him. So that's interesting. But let's get back to 1926, when the New Mexico Historical Society says, hey, world, we got these 2 dudes, actually 3 dudes, including one that has known Billy the Kid since his Silver City days, and they're telling us he's alive, and they just spoke to him. Well, the defenders of Pat Garrett could not stay silent. And fortunately for history, none other than Poe Garrett, Pat Garrett's son and the namesake of Deputy John W. Poe, steps into the ring to add his own voice to that of Walter Noble Burns. And he says the following. The title of this article is Quoting the Record and authorities. Now, where have we heard that before? Same arguments. Dear editor of the El Paso Herald, that reputable citizen of El Paso who shuns the spotlight and whom it pleases under cover and obscurity to make the erroneous assertion in the New Mexico Historical Society that Billy the Kid still lives has been grossly deceived and misinformed by persons whose sympathies were favorable to Billy the Kid. Or he has deliberately and with malice forethought manufactured evidence to launch an unwarranted attack against Mr. Garrett's character and honor. How dare you, sir? Now, this is Pat Garrett. In either event, he has succeeded admirably only in one thing, i.e., he has caused Mr. Garrett's family acute humiliation and distress by virtue of the undesirable and extended publicity giving his declarations. How dare you come out and say, hey, yeah, Billy the Kid's still alive. I knew him in Silver City. He's still alive. Oh my God, how dare you, sir? You're impugning my family, says Pat Garrett. It is a significant fact, states Pat Garrett, that the Honorable Lew Wallace, at that time governor of the territory of New Mexico, had no reason to doubt the official report of the affair submitted by Mr. Garrett, nor did he question the legality of the verdict rendered upon the investigation by a coroner's jury and signed, and then he lists the names, including Sabal Gutierrez and Lorenzo Yamarillo. These men all knew Billy the Kid personally. Very good, substantial citizens of that community and well qualified to act on the case, including Pat Garrett's brother-in-law, who was hiding the outlaw the night he was murdered. Okay, he doesn't say that. Their verdict was that William Bonney, alias Billy the Kid, was killed at Fort Sumner, New Mexico by Sheriff Pat Garrett in the discharge of his official duties, even though he wasn't sheriff of Tobacco County and was sheriff of Lincoln County. But forget that. On July 13th, 1881. Let me repeat that because I was being silly. Their verdict, according to Pat Garrett, was that William H. Bonney, alias Billy the Kid, was killed at Fort Sumner, New Mexico by Sheriff Pat Garrett, his father, in the discharge of his official duties on July 13th, 1881. That's what he says. It is the general opinion and popular belief that the majority of the people of New Mexico, not all of them, just the majority of the people in New Mexico, particularly those designated as old-timers, that Billy the Kid was killed as reported. And that opinion is shared by such honorable citizens as Popcorn Shrimp, Lemon Shrimp, Shrimp Nuggets, Zach T. White, E.M. Bray, W.W. Bridgers, and old-timers and residents of El Paso. Ex-Governor of New Mexico, Honorable Miguel Otero of Santa Fe, also states in a recent issue of The Farmer, a local paper, there was not the slightest doubt that Billy the Kid was killed as reported. Mr. Reputable Citizen states further that Pat Garrett knew at the time that it was not Billy the Kid that he had slain. This is a direct charge of perjury and false pretense against Mr. Garrett. Mr. Reputable Citizen cannot hope to sustain such an indictment on hearsay or manufactured evidence, and no other testimony exists by which he could hope to prove his contention. On the 13th of next month, exactly 45 years will have passed since the officially reported killing of Billy the Kid. It seems quite remarkable, to say the least, that so much time should elapse before the exposure of so patent a fraud if, as Mr. Reputable Citizen says, Billy the Kid is still alive. Signed, Pat Garrett. In other words, how dare you, sir? Everyone knows my father killed Billy the Kid on July 13th. What's more, it says it's a significant fact that Governor Lew Wallace himself had no reason whatsoever to question the official coroner verdict. Inconceivable. But in all seriousness, are you starting to see the similarities throughout history with the people that even today take the same approach to the evidence? How dare you, sir? It was good enough for Governor Wallace. He never questioned the official paperwork. And yet, of course, we know that Governor Lew Wallace left office in March of 1881. And the killing was not until July of 1881. So, I guess technically that's true. He would have had no reason to question it at all because he wasn't governor. But he doesn't say that. He says he was governor, and he wasn't. And also, what's the deal with these people and their dates? Why do I have to convince them it's July 14th for Pete's sake? Your own stupid fake coroner's jury thing says July 14th. Why would Pat Garrett say it was July 13th? Why can't they get the date straight? How come every time these people defend what happened in Fort Sumner, they have to lie and say, how dare you, sir? Why are the facts never, ever, 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 ever what they say they are? I just don't get it. So, I will close with this. There's no mention of the fact that the sheriff's in-laws were harboring the most wanted man in New Mexico. That his brother-in-law, who was complicit in Billy the Kid's crimes and related to the shooter, ended up out of the supposedly dozens and dozens and dozens of reputable citizens all standing around looking for something to do, was chosen to sign the coroner's jury report. The .41 caliber self-cocking double action revolver that was the entire basis of lethal force against the person Pat Garrett shot was never produced. And the kid didn't carry a .41 caliber Colt Thunderer. There are many, many, many instances of people talking about the kid, his target practice, George Coe. He shot .44-40. And the reason he used .44-40 is you could put it in your Winchester 1873 and also in your pistol, which was a Colt single action army. But regardless, there's no pistol. There's no personal effects. There's no statements from anybody else. There are people that knew the kid that went to the historical society with their story and were shut down with the same arguments that people try to use today. And the same pattern of inaccurate misinformation, incorrect dates and facts. I don't know about you, but I am not on the side of the people that said John Tunstall pulled a gun on them. I'm not on the side of the sheriff whose own in-laws were harboring the fugitive he was after and who didn't object to him sitting on the coroner's jury for the person he just shot. Thank you for listening.